The flickering neon sign of the rusty mug barely cut through the thick November fog. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of stale beer, worn leather, and the low, constant rumble of conversation. This establishment wasn't just a bar. It was the impenetrable fortress, the operational heart, the true sanctuary of the Black Mac Bandits motorcycle club. They weren't heroes, in any sense the average citizen understood. They weren't known for charity drives, holding neighborhood watch meetings, or organizing polite community events. They were hardened outlaws, men who lived by their own code, defined by their immense size, faces covered in meaningful, elaborate tattoos, and the deafening roar of their high-powered motorcycles, machines that sounded less like transport and more like rolling thunder unleashed upon the world. Their president, Mac Thorne, a man whose sheer physical presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure, sat at the head of the long, scarred wooden table. He was attempting to navigate the endless necessary evil of managing club logistics, paperwork, supply routes, and the constant balancing act of maintaining peace among volatile men, even for those who deliberately lived outside the boundaries of conventional law. His attention was sharply diverted when his phone buzzed, not the sound of a regular text message, but a harsh, specific, and instantly recognizable chilling alarm he had configured only for the direst and most urgent emergencies. Mac picked up the device, the screen lighting up to display a single, cryptically terrifying message from an anonymous, highly encrypted source. "He's coming back angry. She can't hide her." Mac's features hardened immediately. The easy, casual atmosphere that had briefly settled over him vanished, replaced by the razor-sharp, icy focus of a hunter spotting prey. He knew that source, and the weight of that simple message. It was a lifeline established through years of dangerous, discreet operation, a silent, decentralized network composed of individuals on the fringes of legitimate society, worn-out late-night convenience store clerks, discreet bartenders, exhausted social workers, and others who possessed crucial information, but had been failed by official channels, or who desperately needed help that the slow, methodical processes of law enforcement simply couldn't provide fast enough. The message wasn't a threat from a rival MC. It wasn't a warning about an imminent police raid or a business turf war. It was about raw, human danger. A child. She can't hide her. A phrase that brutally confirmed a mother was frantically trying to shield her young daughter from the violent return of a figure of absolute danger. This wasn't just a domestic situation. It was a ticking clock where bureaucratic delay meant absolute irreversible tragedy. Without hesitation, Max slammed his heavy fist down on the wooden table. The sharp, explosive sound instantly killed all conversation in the room. Every head, men named Rage, who looked exactly the part, Ghost, who could materialize or disappear at will, Viking, a giant with a flowing beard, men who had participated in activities most civilians would categorize as nightmares, turned instantly, locking onto their president. "All right, listen up and listen close." Mac's voice was a deep, gravelly sound, a low, commanding growl that resonated with total, unquestioned authority throughout the room. "We got a code black situation. It's an immediate extraction and defense. A woman and her kid are cornered. They're holed up in a place called the North End Apartment Complex, specifically Unit 4B. The threat, the reason for the alarm, is her violent ex-partner. He just finished his time, he's fresh out of lockup, and he is confirmed to be on his way directly to them, driven by vengeance, toxic possessiveness, and a dangerous mix of resentment and rage. ETA is estimated at under an hour." A low, collective murmur of profound distaste and visceral anger rumbled through the assembled members. They dealt in many shades of grey, but the intentional targeting of the weak, the truly defenseless, especially children, was a deeply entrenched red line that the Black Mac Bandits, despite their fearsome reputation and outlaw classification, simply would never cross. In the twisted, self-defined code of honor that governed their lives, the act of protecting the innocent, even if it required resorting to violent means and bending every single law in the book on behalf of total strangers, was a duty, a strange, silent vow. They might wear the mantle of villains for the world, but inside these walls, when faced with true evil, They saw themselves as the ultimate, necessary enforcers of justice. Mac rose to his full, towering height, deliberately pulling on his heavy vest, his cut, the infamous Black Mac Bandits insignia, a bold symbol of danger and lawlessness to the outside world. But tonight, it was being deployed as a heavy, uncompromising shield. Ghost, you are on immediate surveillance. I need live, confirmed eyes on the North End complex, and an absolute confirmation the moment the target, the X, sets foot on the property. Rage, Viking, you two ride with me. Flank position. We are going in silent. We are going in fast, and we are not under any circumstances leaving that location until that child and her mother are confirmed safe, and that piece of human garbage is permanently dealt with. Commit the rules to memory now. No collateral damage. We are strictly here to save lives, not to engage in pointless destruction or showboat. But if, and I mean if, he initiates physical contact or attempts to bypass us, you stop him. Whatever it takes. Understand the weight of this mission. The three chosen men nodded in unison, their faces masks of grim, focused determination. This was the antithesis of the typical biker run. This wasn't about the open road or a party. This was the brutally ugly side of their chosen existence, the part where they leveraged their intimidating strength, their sheer capacity for ruthlessness, and their fundamental disregard for trivial societal laws to enforce a higher, essential, and much tougher form of immediate justice. Calling the local police was simply not an option. The police, they knew, operated within bureaucratic limits, restricted by procedures and painfully slow response times. This situation was a dire emergency demanding immediate, overwhelming force, and the Black Mac Bandits were defined by their immediate action, consequences be damned. The deafening raw roar that erupted moments later, a coordinated volley from multiple high-powered V-twin engines firing up simultaneously, violently shook the ancient windows of the Rusty Mug and rolled out like a shockwave down the fog-shrouded, deserted street. It was the sound of the bandits moving, a formidable, lethal wedge of black leather and chrome slicing through the night. They looked precisely like the villains the television news warned the public about, but their purpose was now undeniably pure: to place their dangerous, formidable bodies between a vicious predator and a terrified child. This act was their own secret, silent salvation, their strange form of penance, the true hidden reason they tolerated the constant, judgmental glares of a world that didn't understand. They accelerated hard, the November wind a brutally cold sting against their faces, their minds totally fixated on apartment 4B and the two vulnerable lives that depended entirely on their speed, their efficiency, and their legendary ruthlessness. The complex was barely a 15-minute ride away, but every second felt agonizingly long. Mac pushed his massive Harley to its absolute limit, the engine screaming a raw challenge against the oppressive silence of the night. He silently considered the depth of terror that must have motivated the sender of that anonymous message, a profound existential fear so immense it had compelled a desperate person to seek help from the very group society had perpetually warned them to avoid. He made a silent, powerful vow right there. That fear, the source of it, would be utterly extinguished tonight. Their infamous reputation, their sheer acknowledged danger, was about to be utilized as a powerful, righteous weapon for good. The fate of that mother and daughter rested squarely and completely on the thunderous arrival and immediate action of the Black Mac Bandits. The covert mission had begun. The ride to the North End complex was a blur of focused aggression. The city streets, usually a labyrinth of slow-moving traffic and irritating noise, seemed to part for the thunderous procession of the Black Mac Bandits. Mac led the way, his face set in a grim, unchanging expression, the familiar vibration of the powerful engine beneath him less a distraction and more an extension of his own driven heartbeat. He had seen countless acts of human cruelty, and while the club generally trafficked in the organized chaos of the outlaw world, the sheer helplessness of a child caught in a domestic nightmare always struck a raw nerve. For all their lawlessness, the bandits maintained an almost religious fervor for protecting the innocent. It was the one thing that made the hard life worthwhile, the secret virtue they clung to in the shadows. As they tore through the final intersections, Ghost's voice crackled through the secure comms earpiece Mac wore, cutting through the wind noise. "Confirmation, Mac! I'm up on the third-floor balcony of the adjacent building. Clear view of 4B. They're locked down. Lights are off. She's keeping her cool, but the kid is definitely inside. And Mac, I see the vehicle. It's a beat-up blue pickup. 3 minutes out, tops." He's driving like a maniac. Ghost's report was clipped and professional, a testament to his expertise in high-pressure surveillance. The ex-partner was almost there. There was no time left for strategy, only action. Mac signaled his two accompanying riders, Rage and Viking, with a decisive hand gesture, split and secure. The trio slowed slightly as they reached the entrance to the complex, their bikes' engines dropping to a deep, resonant idle that felt more menacing than a scream. The North End complex was the epitome of urban decay, dingy concrete, poorly lit hallways, and a pervasive atmosphere of neglected desperation, a perfect hunting ground for a predator and a fitting battleground for the bandits. Rage peeled off immediately, disappearing into the shadows of the complex's parking lot, his massive frame blending into the darkness. His mission was to find and neutralize the target's vehicle, ensuring no fast escape or use of it as a weapon. Viking, a man of surprising grace despite his bulk, took the central staircase. His objective was to establish a perimeter outside apartment 4B, serving as the immovable wall between the mother and any direct assault. Mac, the club president, took the elevator, a slow, grinding, unreliable relic, but the fastest direct route to the fourth floor without creating unnecessary noise on the stairs. He kept one hand firmly on the handle of the heavy-duty wrench concealed in his vest, a tool he preferred for its intimidating heft and silence compared to firearms, which created messy, irreversible consequences. He needed to resolve this with maximum intimidation and minimal physical harm to the structure or the occupants, only focusing on the threat. The elevator shuddered to a stop on the fourth floor. The hallway was silent, stifling. Mac moved swiftly, his heavy combat boots barely making a sound on the worn carpet. He reached 4B. Viking was already there, leaning against the wall, a stoic silhouette of muscle and leather, his presence alone enough to deter a less desperate man. Viking gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod. Everything was secure outside the apartment. Mac raised a hand, ready to knock, when he heard a sudden, sharp, aggressive scraping sound from the stairwell. The target was here, having bypassed the main hallway, perhaps sensing a trap or simply driven by blind fury. Ghost's comms crackled again. "He's on your floor, Mac. He's armed with something. Looks like a tire iron. Looks like he saw Rage keying his truck in the lot. He is furious." Mac didn't hesitate. "Viking, hold the door. Hold it." Viking pushed his shoulder against the apartment doorframe, becoming a human bulwark. Mac turned, his towering figure filling the narrow hallway. The ex-partner, a wiry, agitated man with desperation burning in his eyes, rounded the corner and skidded to a stop, the tire iron raised high above his head. He saw the biker, the intimidating cut, the sheer size of Mac, and hesitated for a critical split second, the universal reaction to encountering a Black Mac bandit. But his rage was too great, his sense of entitlement too powerful. He charged, letting out a primal, incoherent shout. "Get out of my way! This doesn't concern you, old man!" Mac didn't move. He let the man come, watching him with an unnervingly calm gaze. When the ex was barely 2 steps away, swinging the tire iron down in a desperate arc, Mac shifted, catching the incoming weapon with a powerful armored forearm. The sound was a dull, heavy thud. The ex-partner cried out, not from the impact, but from the sudden, jarring realization that his weapon had been absorbed by something utterly unyielding. Mac's grip, forged from years of heavy machinery and hard living, closed around the man's wrist like a steel clamp. The man dropped the tire iron immediately, his focus shifting from anger to agonizing white-hot pain. Mac twisted the wrist, forcing the man's weight off balance, and drove him backward, not with unnecessary violence, but with controlled, overwhelming power, pinning him against the concrete wall with his own body weight. The man struggled futilely, his feet pedaling in the air. Mac leaned in close, his voice now a low, dangerous whisper that promised absolute ruin. "This concerns me now. You mess with the helpless. You mess with the bandits. You want to hurt her? You go through me. And trust me, you don't want that." He maintained the pressure, the man's face contorted in a silent scream of pain and disbelief. Suddenly, Rage appeared from the stairwell, having secured the vehicle and now observing the scene with a silent, menacing authority. The sight of two massive bandits and the silent promise of Ghost observing from afar broke the ex-partner's will. He stopped struggling. The rage was gone, replaced by pure, paralyzing terror. Mac eased his grip just enough to speak clearly into the comms. "Ghost, confirm the situation is stable. Rage, secure the area. Viking, check on the residents inside 4B. Tell her it's safe. Tell her the bandits sent their regards." The immediate crisis was averted, but the true work of protection was just beginning. Mac held the man pinned against the cold, grimy hallway wall for another minute, not speaking, simply allowing the sheer terror of the encounter to sink into his captive. The man's initial fury had completely dissolved, replaced by a deep, shaking realization that he had just charged into a force far more dangerous and unforgiving than anything he had faced in lockup. He wasn't dealing with the police, bound by rules and liability. He was dealing with the Black Mac Bandits, men who wrote their own rules and whose only liability was to their own code of honor. Mac finally released the pressure on the man's wrist, shoving him away just hard enough to send him staggering backward and collapsing into a heap on the worn carpet. The man was defeated, not just physically, but spiritually. He knew he had lost his chance, and more importantly, he now understood the absolute, chilling terror of being on the receiving end of outlaw justice. From inside apartment 4B, a faint, muffled sound reached Mac's ears, the sound of a child crying, quickly silenced by a mother's soothing, frightened voice. Viking gently pushed the door open just enough to confirm the scene. The mother, pale and shaking, was clutching her little girl tight, her face buried in the woman's shoulder. Viking's heavy, reassuring voice, surprisingly soft, spoke the simple, powerful words, "It's over, Mum. He's down. You're safe." Mac knew that the true protection had only just begun. They couldn't stay. Their presence was a temporary shield, and the law would only complicate things if they were caught, treating them as criminals, not saviors. Mac knelt beside the defeated man, his face inches from the ex-partner's terrified gaze. "Here's how this goes," Mac instructed, his voice low and utterly devoid of emotion. "You get up. You walk out of this complex. You get in your beat-up truck, which Rage has already rendered useless for anything faster than a slow limp out of town, and you drive. You don't stop driving. You don't look back. And you never, ever come back to this complex, this neighborhood, or within 100 miles of this woman and her daughter. If you do," Mac paused, letting his reputation complete the sentence, "we will know, and the next time we won't be using a wall to pin you. We'll use a message." He stood up, towering over the shaking figure. The threat was explicit, final, and backed by the club's entire, terrifying legacy. The man, utterly broken, scrambled to his feet, not even looking toward the apartment door, and stumbled down the hallway stairs, vanishing into the oppressive gloom. Ghost confirmed the retreat over the comms. "Target is mobile, heading south, not looking back, Mac." "Clean exit confirmed." Mac turned back to the apartment door, where Viking still stood guard. The mother, gaining a sliver of confidence, had eased the door open a bit further. She looked at Mac, a massive figure in black leather with his arms covered in intricate, shadowy tattoos, and yet there was no fear in her eyes, only profound, exhausted gratitude. She knew who these men were. She knew the risk she took contacting them, but she also knew they were the only ones who moved fast enough to intercede. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for saving my baby." Mac simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that required no fancy words or explanations. They didn't do this for thanks. They did it for the silence of their own consciences. Viking produced a small, nondescript burner phone, placing it quietly on the welcome mat outside her door. "This number is for immediate use only if this situation changes," Viking said gently. "You never call the other number again. You throw this phone away once you've made a plan and moved, but for tonight, you're safe. It was their final safety net, their promise of eternal vigilance. Mac turned, not wanting to linger. The bandits didn't deal in emotional exchanges. They dealt in decisive action and silent protection. Within minutes, the 3 massive Harleys were rolling out of the complex, their roar echoing briefly before fading back into the city noise, leaving no trace except the lingering scent of exhaust and the profound, life-altering sense of security in apartment 4B. As they rode back toward the Rusty Mug, the fog seemed to lift slightly, and Mac reflected on their peculiar existence. To the world, they were men of violence, criminals who defied every norm. But tonight, they had been the ultimate, unwavering shield for the weak. They couldn't be the police. They couldn't be the lawful saviors. They operated in the dark spaces the light refused to touch, using their fear and their infamy as weapons against true evil. Their life was a constant contradiction, a perpetual negotiation between being an outlaw and upholding a fierce personal code of ethics. They would never receive medals. They would never be thanked on the evening news. They would only ever be seen as the Black Mac Bandits. But as Mac throttled his bike harder, the powerful engine answering with a faithful, deep roar, he knew the truth that mattered. They saved the girl, and in the silent world of the MC, that was all the recognition they would ever need or want. The mission was complete. They rode home, the silent, terrifying, unlikely heroes of the night.